I'm trying to think of a good example. So when my children were quite young, I don't know, maybe 5 and 7, maybe a bit younger, they were playing with swearing a little bit, and they're boys. They were playing with strong behaviors and a bit of like sort of, bordering disgusting type language. And a dear friend of mine said, Jack and the Beanstalk. That's the tale. The giant is disgusting. He is gross. He uses foul words and quite violent imagery in a way, scary. And so we played around with that story for a while to meet whatever it was in my children. They wanted that. They needed to be met with it. They saw how disgusting this giant is and that he's, not a good character. And that's the kind of, it's that dominant sort of bullying type character that uses that language and is quite, it wasn't a character they wanted to be. So it gave them a framework to really work, to look at themselves and feel that without me saying, do not use that language, do not do that. But I fed them the story. And so I looked at the words, and only a parent knows their own children. Only a parent really knows what they can handle and what will work for their child. And I know what images are going to go deep with my children, and I know how much they can take. So I might moderate the chop off the head to, he did away with him or something. And again, it is such a personal thing that only a parent really can decide on whether their child can handle it or not in terms of what you give them. And of course, the fairy tales I've shared with my children over the years developmentally have changed given, as they've grown and what they've not only can handle, but what they've needed to hear, the strength in the story and what they've needed to be met with, then I feel comfortable delivering it to them.
Each of my guests for this episode are parents, and I wanted to hear from parents' experiences, so I called up my good friend Erica to ask her, what's her take on violence in children's stories? Erica Nettle Chick is also founder of Luminous Youth, an organisation that fosters inspiration and empowerment for youth. Erica is also mother of 4 children, ranging in age from 1 to 14.
I suppose I would love to start by saying how I view story. Story to me is really important. It's something I've spent a lot of time researching and also just tuning into my own mothering instincts about. Because I think that story is really powerful. And the way I see story is that story is actually medicine. And like plants can be medicine, there isn't an answer that there isn't just a rule that would apply to everyone. So some plants are super beneficial for some people in a certain situation, and for others in another situation, it may not be so beneficial. So for me, that's how I use story in raising my children. And I also used it as a really strong point of connection. Like every single day we tell stories. We either tell story from our own imaginations, it's a beautiful way to keep in touch with our imaginations, because we seem to lose contact with that as we get older and older. But we also read books together, and I find that really connecting. Like we all snuggle in together and get a cup of tea and read story. And it's getting a little bit harder to do that every day now that they're getting older, but we still manage to even if it's one chapter, as a point of connection.
Once upon a time, a very long time ago now, about last Friday, Winnie the Pooh lived in a forest all by himself under the name of Sands.
I can only speak for myself and my children. I don't really feel like I have an answer for anyone else. And I need to make that really clear. It's not like I'm against violent stories. I don't know other kids, and I don't know their circumstances, and I don't know what they crave and why they crave it in a story. I can only just speak through my experience as a mother with my children and, children close to me, in that it frightened them. And as a mother, I didn't feel good about that, of needlessly frightening a child when there is nothing in their real world that they can relate it to. So basically, I didn't see the point. I felt like it was pointless to frighten them. If that child is one of the children who enjoy that, I have met children who actually enjoy being frightened. I may have had a completely different take on it. I'm kind of like, the way I raise my children is I kind of take their lead in the directions that we go with, you know, a lot of safe boundaries as well. But none of them craved it. Now, in saying that, my 14-year-old craves it now. He loves the thrill. He loves Star Wars. He loves, you know, books about men, you know, conquering this and doing that. So, of course, that's where he's going. That's what he's reading. That's what he's into, and I fully support that. I suppose, yeah, I don't think it's dangerous. I think it's pointless to frighten a child because we've been told that there's special metaphors in there that they need to know subliminally, you know, like the fairy tales and all of that, that I've had a lot of people kind of coming at me with all this deep wisdom, that there's all this stuff underlying in them and that they'll never get that lesson. And I don't believe that for a second. I think if my child needed the underlying lesson in those fairy tales, they would have craved them. So I suppose the biggest point here is that we really tune into our children and to see what their bodies feel relaxed with comfortable with, happy with. For my children, it was really nourishing, earthy tales of wisdom and possibility. You've just got to go with what you feel into. But I think that's the thing, is to feeling into what your child, rather than us having an opinion about what they should read and should be fed, is just really tuning into what they enjoy and what they get stuff out of, and watching their body language and feeling into their vibe when you're reading to them. And as I said, my oldest son is now craving really big, exciting stories. And so my daughter, I can see, is just on the cusp of that, and she's 12. So I just take their lead. And as littlies, they didn't want any violence. I certainly didn't show them movies and media that is full of violence. I don't agree with it. And they never asked much to watch it. So it just wasn't in our world. I just wanted to keep fear out of my kids' psyche for as long as I could. And when it came, they had a really great base for us to work with and some really great stories up their sleeves to draw on. They weren't bombarded with blockbuster movies made by people who don't care about my child, only the money. They had clarity. And that's what I didn't see in some of the kids who had been bombarded with a lot of movies that were full of violence from a very young age, which I really think is different to story. It's kind of a different thing, but it is story. It's become our modern day story for a lot of people who don't have the time to sit down and read with their children every day. Their story is on the screen. And I think there's a lot of worry in that. I think it's something we really need to visit, because I don't think people think enough about the medicine in story. And if the medicine in story isn't thought about, we just don't think about what we're showing our children. It's like just letting them eat any plant they want, or without understanding the medicine in that plant, and then going, oh God, it was poisonous.
I'm more worried about the stuff that's on screens and the video games, and there's tons and tons of research looking at that, and you know, I think the jury's gone out and come back. There's no argument anymore that there is a level at which on-screen violence and story violence starts to desensitize the child's nervous system. It doesn't necessarily mean they go out and commit acts of violence, but it removes some of that sensitivity that we need, that because it's sensitivity to violence that makes us the kind of person that will act in the community to stop violence from going on. Even if we don't act out the violence, when we turn away from it, that means we're being desensitized. And the world needs us not to be that way, okay? Especially in this moment in history. We need people that are sensitized, not hypersensitized, but just people that are committed to, people that feel with their hearts and say, no, that won't stand. And one of the things we can do, instead of just refusing to buy the book, is to make sure that we help our kids to process the story, to speak their feelings about it. So it's not that the book does the damage and then it's too late. There's lots you can do to help them to process the feelings that came out afterwards so that they don't get stuck with the feeling of shock and horror. Editing is not the only helpful tool at our disposal. I think helping the child to process what they see is equally important and helpful. So when we did read very, scary bits, we would pause sometimes and go, wow, how did that make you feel? Oh my God. And, and we would both kind of have a little sort of a catharsis moment to process the emotion that comes up through the story. You can't prevent that from happening in life. It's more about giving our children the tools to process moments of horror. So this is dynamic. It's not just about the book. It's about the reader. It's about how we deliver the content and what we do after. It's what we do after the book, right? And in between the readings. That's what makes the difference to the way that the book is going to be digested.
And I just want to say, ultimately, as each of my guests have put it, it's up to the families to decide the literature choices they make, and perhaps it is time to look to children themselves, to what interests them. As Erica says, tuning into your child and following their lead. I've created a children's book list, and I've asked each of my guests for their favourite books that they read with their children. And I've also included some other parents and professional picks. So you can go to pbbmedia.org. And we also want to hear from you. Do you have a favourite book that you read with your children? And I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond. I want to thank our guests Robin Grille, Annie Bryant and Erica Nettle Chick. Tune in next week for more information and inspiration bringing us full circle. You can find our show on iTunes, Spreaker, the usual social media under Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond, and our website at pbbmedia.org.